Okay, here's an obedience session with Snug on February 17th. So he's about 7.5 months old. This is kind of a mishmash session, so you can see how I tend to kind of flow. Once I have a clump of exercises, then I have a tendency to flow and do a couple of one, then a couple of another, and I move through and I rotate the exercises, right? So I'm not over drilling any one thing, I'm just kind of touching on a few. I'm using food through the bulk of it, and then I'll do a play session at the end, which is kind of common for me. Only you'll notice in my play session in this clip that I'm beginning to do a little bit of obedience with the toy. So I'm choosing some really basic, easy behaviors and having him do them for the toy instead of just for food, right? So in the early stages, I construct most of the behaviors with food. Once the play is developed to the point that I want, then I start to use the toy a lot more. And he's at a spot where I can do that. So here we go. I'm starting off engaging him as usual, and then I'm going to go into some handling and prep for the hold. I've been working really hard on the retrieve. So I generally prime for the retrieve by doing these manipulations, right? The dog has to submit to me holding its muzzle, grabbing the collar, moving with me. I've been doing fronts a lot as well because I'm going to pair the retrieve with the front, so I've been working fronts a fair bit. He's at a spot now where I'm, again, teaching him to rest his head on me. So I'm trying to move the front along and the retrieve along at this point, because those two are going to come together relatively quickly. A little bit more of the handling drills for the hold. He's resting his chin on my hand. I'm pulling the collar. He's coming with me. And I'm adding a sit as well. Now we're going to go into actual hold with the PVC. Good. Again, so that he doesn't think every time the PVC comes out I'm going to stuff it in his mouth. Sometimes I just hold it in front of his face, and if he doesn't avoid me, I mark it. Good. So there we are. And now I'm trying to get both hands off. Up until now I've had the upper hand off, and then you notice I can break contact with my lower. The other thing is that since the retrieve for him was a little stressful learning the hold, you'll notice that when I release him, I reward him, and then I do a food toss as well. That food toss, run back between my legs, that game, the food throw, come back game, is a game that he really likes, and it pumps him up a little bit. So I'm using that. I'm going to switch to a toy relatively soon, but I'm using that for the time being to get a little bit of more motivation out of him to help compensate for the stress of the hold. So same thing, if he doesn't turn his head away from me, still a little bit avoidant there, he's trying to leave. But if he doesn't turn his head away from me, then I sometimes mark it. There, he didn't avoid me very much, allowing me. Now I'm getting a little bit of movement with the PVC, right? And so I'm supporting his chin. I tap lightly on the top of his nose. So that's one of the ways that I help him. I break contact with my fingers, and then I bring him back down. And I break contact, and then I'll wind up going tap, 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 tap. And so that's an intermediate between having my hands on and holding his muzzle and having my hands off. Break contact, touch again. Break contact, touch again. And I use that a lot of times when I'm starting to try to get the dog to hold it on their own. And now I'm trying to break contact with my lower hand, the one that's under his chin. Same thing, a reward just for him not turning his head away from me. Now he wants, and I'm no marking when he tries to avoid now. Hold it. He moves with me a little bit. I get a sit, and I break contact with my hands. Right. So now there I had him holding the object without me touching the top or the bottom of his muzzle, and I had a little bit of movement and a sit. Right. We're getting close now. Now he's starting to work his way through. Fronts again. It's one of the ways, once I start getting the idea of a front, I'll practice fronts as well by tossing. Tossing a piece of food and then having him come back to front. Same thing, I'm breaking contact. He's holding it himself. Nice. My wife Carol in the background watching, being Snug's cheerleader. Switching gears here again. Going to do a little bit of my finishes. I've been working a touch on finishes, kind of along a barrier. So I moved a little bit further away from the barrier. Bringing him in. This is a little bit of the healing. I'm in transition, so where he is with the healing right now, I've kind of haven't been working it super heavily, because he'll track a lure like that. He'll heal as long as there's a target. But when I get the target out of the picture and ask him to watch, he'll watch, but he holds his head a lot lower and he kind of looks out of the top of his eyes. Very much exactly like his dad did. My monk did that as well. I think I've said this before, but I deferred Monk's healing until he was probably 14 months old. And Snug feels the same way. I'm teaching him to kind of contact heal, where he'll touch my leg and walk with me for bite work and things like that. And I'm teaching him the pieces of healing, like a focus cue. I've done some luring in position. I'm teaching him to find position, all that. But I'm not really hardcore working on his focused healing. It feels like he gets a little more mature, and it will be an easier process for me. Producing the reward up in his armpit for reward placement, and then doing a toss. These are the beginnings of capping exercises, right? So I got him here. Let's look at that a little bit again. Here, I'm going to go back here just a touch. So if I go back here, so I get him chasing the food, and then in the midst of that, I ask for a down, right? So we'll watch this again. I do this with sits and downs, and eventually stands too, right? He's chasing, and then in the act of that, I ask him to down and make a little help. He does, and I release him. I do that a lot with toys when I get there. Same thing there. Misses. If he's good. So that's the beginnings of getting him to go from an active to a contained state. A little bit for my sitting. So you notice I'm flowing back and forth between a variety of things, right? Just mixing it up now. So here's the focus. So you notice how his head is different when I'm not holding a target up there, kind of lower and in. He'll still focus on me, but he doesn't feel like it's really easy for him to lift his head and move with me. A little bit of position work. I've been working a lot on the stand to get him to pop back. There, that's a good stand. I like that. Reward placement's key. I do a lot of rewarding behind the dog for positions to make sure he doesn't want to come forward, especially for the stands and the downs. All right, here we're going to switch to our toy. And you'll notice it's very similar to our other play, but now I'm going to use the toy a little bit for obedience. Foot targets is one of the classic ones, right? I use foot targets a lot because it's a really basic behavior, and my dogs have a good foundation. So I'm trying to get him to turn a little bit, yeah, with the toy.
Good boy.
Still a little sticky leaving the toy, right? So. So there's another really basic behavior for the toy. He knows the place cue for going, now I did a down, and I use the toy like a lure, just like I would a food lure. And then if I push into him, he scoots back, just like a scoot back with food for our downs. You can still see that propensity for his butt to go a little crooked when he slides backward in the down.
You know my tails now.
Beginnings of using the toy for a stand. Switch back to food, and we're done.